Why do you think it's going to be a problem coming 2026, 2027 and not 2025?
There's really going to be a divide between the people who got onto AI and used AI and get comfortable with how AI fits into their business, and those who didn't.
From experience, I tried to push thinking more people was a better solution, and I realized that we actually want less people but better people.
TikTok is like crack cocaine for the brain. It's you are just ramming dopamine down.
A lot of people who are listening to this who are not in the digital world, would you say it's too late for them to jump into that? Today we have an awesome guest who's with us, Daniel Priestley. Daniel has a huge plethora of experience in the business world, massive in terms of from a marketing perspective, runs 8 companies, he's an author, and has a complete wisdom of knowledge. He's going to run us through in terms of marketing, AI, and the latest updates running into 2025. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today in Dubai.
It's awesome. It's so good to be here.
First thing I want to ask you is, coming into 2025, how important of a role do you think AI is going to play in terms of marketing and in terms of marketing going forwards generally?
Okay, so the AI thing is, big picture, AI is a game changer. There's no question. It's like electricity or smartphones, any of those technologies that were massive movements or have been massive movements, social media, for example. But if you think about, say, social media, there's a couple of years there where it just doesn't feel like it's super important. But then there's a tipping point where it's like, if you're not doing it, you know, you're really behind the game. So I think we're still kind of in that zone of it's an important tool, it's a useful tool, you should be using it, but you're not going to get crushed in 2025 for not using it. But 2026, 2027, there's really going to be a divide between the people who got onto AI and used AI and get comfortable with how AI fits into their business, and those who didn't. So we've all got to find a balance. Most people are not finding a good balance at the moment. So for example, I get just every time I post on LinkedIn, I get all these automated AI responses that I can just immediately see their AI generated responses. You know, I see people posting AI generated content and you can just glance at it and you know it's AI generated content. It's not in their voice. So to me, you know, they're trying to use AI and good, you know, I'm glad they are. But they haven't found the right balance with it. And that's kind of where we are right now. Everyone's just figuring out, where does this fit into my business? How do I use it? And that's a good place to be for 2025. That's where you should be benchmarking yourself. You should say, am I just getting myself comfortable with it?
Why do you think it's going to be a problem coming 2026, 2027 and not 2025? Because
right now, this is the worst it's going to be in the rest of our lives. So as bad as it is, all of its flaws right now, this is the worst it will be. And in a year from now, it's going to be twice as good. 2 years from now, it's going to be twice as good as that. So it's doubling every year in how good it is. Things just take time. Things take time. So we think about smartphones as taking over our lives, you know, in the 2010s, but they were launched in 2007 in a big way. We think about internet, you know, kind of being a 2000s and 2010 kind of phenomenon, but it was actually like in the 90s. So there is just an adoption time. There's a momentum that society has built in where things just continue to work longer than they should. You know, even into the 2000s, I was picking up clients using fax broadcasting. Fax broadcasting was a thing. And it kind of worked right through till 2005, 2006. You could fax someone. You could fax them a thing. You could send out physical brochures. You could go to physical meetups and events. So there are things that continue to work longer than they should. You know, they've hit maturity and they just don't disappear overnight. And then there are things that kind of hit that S-curve, which is where AI is now, and they creep up on you. And it's very, very hard to catch up once it really tips and it's away.
Do you think AI can replace marketers entirely?
Here's what's going to happen. You're going to have, previously you would have had an agency with 30 or 40 talented people and then maybe 40 or 50 support people. And now, you know, you've got an agency of 80 or 90 people headcount. AI is going to make 10 really talented people essentially as effective as that 80 or 90 person agency. So it's not so much that AI is roaming around doing stuff on its own. It's just super leveraging those people who are very good at what they do. So a very talented person, you mentioned before I've got 8 different companies. How do I have 8 companies? Because I leverage a lot of tech. Because I've got the right software, because I've got playbooks and I've got media and content and all of that sort of stuff, I'm leveraging technology in a way that's fairly modern, fairly new, and it's pretty easy for me to have, 8 companies. Each company's got 30 to 60 people, and we just kind of we just execute the playbook and away we go. So without that tech, I couldn't do it. With the tech, I can do it. It's going to be the same with AI. So I don't think AI is going to steal anyone's job. I think someone who's very good at using AI will steal a lot of people's jobs as they just become very highly effective.
With AI, what do you think is the best tools people should be using that they maybe haven't heard of other than ChatGPT, which is what everyone uses?
Yeah, I like Plex. So I'm finding that myself doing a lot more searches on Plex rather than Google. So it's plex.it is the URL. And so I will Plex things rather than Google things now. So you say about ChatGPT, I would actually really just urge people just get the paid subscription with ChatGPT and start talking to AI more. Spend time each day in conversation with AI. So you don't need a lot of tools. I mean, there are great tools out there and they do stuff and they help automate stuff and all of that. But when was the last time you asked AI, how do I grow this business? How do I do this thing? What are some of the 5 things I should be doing to make this sort of thing work? Create a job description for me. Write a letter to a competitor and see if they want to sell their business to me. Suggest a strategy for buying 3 or 4 companies in the next 12 months. What would be a good complementary fit with my business? Have those kind of coaching conversations with AI and see what comes back. So kind of get in the rhythm of sense checking your thinking, using it as a sounding board, just sort of being in conversation with AI a lot more. I know that sounds kind of weird, but
I really like that thought process. So one of the things I've done sometimes is I will say, this is a scenario, I would think about doing X, Y, Z, pretend you're this person, what would you say?
Yeah.
To try and see the type of advice or guidance I would get. Do you have examples of maybe prompts that maybe you use or ways you personally do that?
I talk to it like I talk to a person. So my prompt engineering is, I'm thinking of buying a company. Here's who I am and here's what I do. What do you think of this? Write a letter of intent to buy this company, or I'm trying to generate more leads for this kind of company. What are 10 different marketing strategies that might work? So I talk to it very much like a person, and I think the more you can just simply talk to it like it's an intelligent intern. So I like to think of AI like it's a graduate, 22-year-old graduate who's got an MBA and also a master's degree in 15 other topics, and doesn't know much about the world in terms of if you just left an intern sitting at a desk, they're just going to do nothing. But if you give that intern something to do, that graduate something to do, then they spring to it and do a good, reasonable job of it. It's going to need oversight. It's going to need someone to check it in. But if you imagine just simply that you had a 22-year-old graduate who was happily just sitting around your office waiting for things to be delegated to, how would you delegate them? What do you need to explain to them in order to delegate something? Is a fun way to do it.
That's a very interesting thought process, and I think the biggest issue I see from people using AI is just user error in terms of the ability to actually ask the question, which is actually, you mentioned earlier about if you had 80, 90 staff, the 10 people remain. The 10 people remain and people with a really high skill set who know how to get the right prompt to get the right result out of it.
So here's the 3 big distinctions that I've got around AI so far. Distinction number 1 is creating versus consuming. So AI turns people into consumers and it jams stuff down your throat. So AI is really, really good at keeping you watching TikTok videos. It's really good at getting you to listen to the next Spotify track. It's really, really good at another YouTube video You went on YouTube for 10 minutes, but haha, we got you 50 minutes. That was AI. You went onto Amazon to buy one thing, haha, you bought 3 things. That's AI. So it's really, really good at getting you to be a hyper consumer. And it's also really good at being a hyper creator. So the first key distinction is you've got to recognize when is AI twisting my arm to buy more stuff or consume more stuff, and just be aware that this is what's happening. What's happening right now is I'm being influenced by an AI to buy stuff. It's doing its magic. And then you want to try and flip as quick as possible to how do I use AI to be a super creator. So rather than creating 100 units, I can create 500 units. Rather than creating one video, I can create 10 videos. Rather than creating a little mini marketing campaign, I can do a really great annual campaign because of my support from AI. So the first distinction is that distinction. It's really important that you make the distinction. I really see a dystopian future potential where some people are dragged down the consumption rabbit hole and their life becomes terrible because they just overconsume, and some people are hyper creators and they make more money than they've ever dreamed because they're hyper creating. And that really is an AI wedge that it drives. So that's insight number 1. The insight number 2 is what I would call vitality versus functionality. So vitality is life force energy, and functionality is the ability to complete tasks. AI is exceptionally good at functionality, but it has no vitality. So humans are vitality, and AI backfills the functionality. I'll give you an example. If I want to throw a party, I have to decide as a human that I'm going to be responsible for throwing a party. I'm going to invite people. I'm going to make a really great night. I want to bring people together. I want people to connect and gel. I want to get 5 or 6 or 7 really great people together, and we're going to have a really good night together over dinner. So AI is really good for making a list of all the potential restaurants that'd be a good fit. AI is really good for writing the email, draft an email to invite people. AI is good at creating maybe a syntax of what we're going to, arrival times, and, maybe if we wanted to have questions that we'll discuss over dinner, anything at all, or following up after the dinner. So all the functional elements of putting on a dinner party, AI is great at all of that, provided a human decided in the first place that I want to do this. This is something I'm committed to doing. So it's that life force energy. We breathe things into life. And AI can't breathe anything into life. Only humans can do that. But AI can then backfill all the stuff that you need to do that. So that's distinction number 2. And number 3 is the difference between content and context. So content is all the stuff that ends up on a page or a screen. And context is understanding the bigger picture. So humans are very good at understanding the bigger picture. AI can't do that very well yet. So I'll give you an example. I recently completed an acquisition. I understand the bigger picture of the acquisition. I understand my business, their business, what we're trying to achieve long term, why we're a good strategic fit. Provided I have that overarching context, the AI was able to do all the content. It did all the legal agreements, the letter of intent. It did the onboarding document. It did the press release to announce the acquisition. Did the email to the database to tell them to come across to the new service. So all of the content required, there was probably 50 key documents that AI was doing 80% of. And it could only be useful at those 50 things because I understand the overarching context of what we're trying to achieve. So those are the 3 biggest distinctions that I want people to have going into 2025. So vitality versus functionality, content versus context, and create versus consume.
So AI lacks the ability to have perspective, essentially.
Yeah, it's short term. It's like a dumb intern. It's like a graduate, right? It's sitting there. It's like, I don't know what this business does. But if you ask me to research a market, I'll research the market. I don't know what this business does, but if you ask me to draft a letter of intent, I'll draft it. I don't really understand this business, but if you want me to do a little marketing campaign, I'll do it. If you need me to draft an email, I'll draft an email. So it's that kind of like, that's what I mean by a 22-year-old graduate, smart in some ways, but dumb in other ways.
So then if you take the principles of AI and then say becoming a person of influence in social media, how do you see that quote unquote market changing in terms of maybe using AI to manipulate that world, and even the point we're getting to with like fake creators who aren't even a real person?
I think that something interesting just happened a week ago, which was there was a turning point in the presidential campaign. Now, right now, when we're recording this, we don't know who's won, right? US presidential election.
Hopefully Trump, in my opinion.
Yeah, right? So we don't know who's won. It could go either way. We've seen the campaign. So we're recording this the day before the election. But there was a real turning point. Actually, it was on both sides. Kamala did a podcast, Call Her Daddy, and Trump and Vance did Joe Rogan. 3-hour podcasts, 2-hour podcasts. Why is that so important that they did that? Because people really crave the authenticity. They want to know, what are you like when you're unfiltered? We sit there and we say, okay, I really don't care about sound bites anymore because I know that they can be manipulated. I don't care about those well-edited clips. I know those can be manipulated. I don't care about highly produced will.i.am songs because that can be manipulated. I don't care about speeches from the from the podium, because that can be scripted by someone else and manipulated. What I care about is seeing you sitting down with a podcaster and having a 2 or 3 hour conversation where we just talk about life and liberty and happiness and, you know, all of those sorts of things. And it's very, very hard to fake or filter that. Now, why has that become such an important media? It's because of AI. So because we can create fake stuff, people are now gravitating towards real stuff. There are very few formats that are possible to fake. That are impossible to fake. And the long podcast is now an impossible to fake one. I think the long form podcast is going to become one of the most important formats in the next 5 years. And I think what you'll see is almost every CEO of every major company prioritizing being on a long form podcast.
And is that from a personal branding point of view from their own perspective, or also to try and get across their company's message to maybe shareholders to listen to, and even employees?
Yeah, well, employees definitely. I think there's a certain age of employee that has to have that connection to the founder or to the CEO, and it has to be authentic. It has to be like, I've seen them on a podcast. I know that they're a good fit. There's good chemistry there. I think it's the personal brand. We've now entered an era where personal brand, especially of the leader, was like a weird thing. First, it was weird to have. Like a few weird people had it, like Steve Jobs.
That's the first person I thought of,
yeah. And then like, okay, a few people are doing it. Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, probably still in the weird camp. But then it's like, okay, now I'm seeing Tim Cook on a stage. Okay, it's transferable. I'm seeing some other CEOs going out there and having conversations and being unfiltered. Jamie Dimon especially is now often on podcasts and often on, you know, long form content. So we're starting to see those sorts of things. And it's the moment that there's always a tipping point where things go from being weird to being acceptable to being essential. So we saw this with Franklin Roosevelt. He did the fireside chat with his presidential campaign in the 30s, and that was all about being on radio. And up until that point, presidents had never been on radio. It was all print. So the only way you knew about a presidential campaign was what was written in the newspaper. Then he just does a fireside chat, completely revolutionary, and then all presidential candidates went on radio. And then 1960, Nixon versus JFK, and it was a televised debate, and it was about having television and seeing what they look like and seeing how they perform on that thing. And then fast forward to Obama 2008, it was about interaction on social media and having a social media presence, and that was completely unheard of up until that point, and then it became normalized. And then the big one in 2016 was about personalization and using data. Trump and Brexit were both data-driven campaigns. So then data became the biggest thing from 2016 till now. And then this campaign, the big emerging trend that has come off of the back of this one is the long form 2 to 3 hour podcast.
It's interesting for two reasons. One, I listened to Joe Rogan podcast the other day. I was listening to the Elon Musk Joe Rogan one on the way
this
here.
Morning?
Actually.
Yeah,
I was listening on the way here. And when I was listening to the Joe Rogan Donald Trump one, I was like, this is fucking gold.
Yeah.
Like, if you want Trump to do well, and you see how many views and how much watch time it has, what I think is also wild is how people can see how these platforms are being manipulated. So, for example, I clocked on it straight away. I think the day after the Donald Trump Joe Rogan podcast came up, I searched on YouTube to watch it. It's like clip. It's not there. The one that's got like 40 million views, it's 3 hours long. I had to go onto his channel to go and find it because Google had like hidden it, so it wasn't showing up.
Wild, isn't it?
This is one of the biggest companies in the world, and this is where you suddenly realise the game is rigged in a lot of degrees and how much manipulation is happening, which is why I think the beauty of podcasts and the open forum for talk is beautiful, because it's something that is very rare now.
It also does this thing to our brains. So there's this professor, Robin Dunbar, and he has studied how people bond and how they form deeper relationships. And he uses this idea that you start off as a stranger, you then enter a different circle of an acquaintance, you then enter a different circle of being a friend, a close friend, a best friend, like family. So you end up going through these circles, these concentric circles that our brain has different storage points for. And essentially, the person who is a friend or an acquaintance has clocked up 7 hours with you in the last 90 days, something like that. And if you've clocked up 7 hours with someone, especially if they've been sort of like conversational and positive, then you know their name, you know their face, you know what they're about. Now, the long-form podcast is essentially like when someone's listening to a Joe Rogan, Donald Trump, they're actually becoming friends with Joe Rogan and Donald Trump. So as far as the human brain knows, it's like, oh, these are my new friends. I'm actually adopting them into a new circle of influence for me. Now, that only happens, according to the research, through a process of spending time together. You can't do it through short form. You can't do it through ads. It's different. So like quick little ads don't do it. Little social media posts don't do it. It's long form content that makes you deeply connected to someone.
With that being said, do you think the era of paid advertising on social media platforms is coming to an end, or is going to have a lot of challenges maybe in the next few years?
Google did some research, and I forget, I'll have to look it up, but if you search Google messy middle, and I think it's how people buy in 2024 or something like that, but it's basically they identify this concept called the messy middle. So we used to think of a buying journey as top of funnel, mid funnel, and bottom of funnel. And I hate the word funnel because like humans are humans and we don't like to be funneled towards things, but you get the concept. Top of funnel is awareness, and then trust building, and then monetization, sales, conversion, right? So it's kind of like awareness, trust, conversion type, top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of funnel. And Google basically said there was this school of thought for a long time that you just moved people through that funnel. And then they actually went to see if it was still working and still happening, and they said it doesn't work anymore. So what happens is we have a top of funnel experience, which is typically an ad. We discover something. Then we enter what Google calls the messy middle, and this is where we just go on a random journey. And then once we've done a bunch of random stuff that's totally unpredictable, we end up at some point buying something, and it's very, very hard to track a straight line to it. So what that might look like is I might see your ad on Instagram and you're directly talking about what you do and how you do it and all that sort of stuff. I might just clock who you are and see your face and see a little bit about you. I might follow your Instagram, but I might not respond and I might not do anything for weeks. And then I notice that you're doing a long podcast. I'll listen to the podcast. Now I'm like on a different platform. I'm on Spotify and I'm listening to a long podcast. Then I'm like, oh, okay, I like this guy.
Now, talking about key person of influence, you've blown up across a lot of different podcast platforms and come up a lot on YouTube. What would you say is the best 2 to 3 things someone can do to become a key person of influence?
So we use the 5 Ps. So 5 Ps is number 1 is having a great pitch, then publishing content, having product and service ecosystem that people can buy, raising your profile, and doing joint ventures and partnerships. So those are the 5 Ps. So the first thing that you need to do if you want to blow up or have a great key person of influence brand is you've got to have a great pitch. When someone says, tell me a bit about you, tell us a bit about what you do, it has to be interesting. Now, to a degree, you can script this, and you should script it, but to a degree, it's about having an awareness of what makes you interesting. What are you